All right, good morning, everyone. And we are very thankful and grateful for all of you to be here with us. But before we get started, there's a few housekeeping items to review. This web conference will be recorded. All participants will be muted. And to avoid any unwanted noises, we do encourage you to mute your own phones and computers. And we do also encourage you to type in your questions and or comments in the chat box. Welcome to I Carry Your Words With Me, Meaningful Written Correspondence for Incarcerated Survivors. This web conference was developed as a tool for all the California Advancing PREA participants as new posters, advertising and access to advocates via phone calls and written correspondence are being hung in all CDCR facilities. And as a reminder, if you're not sure if those posters have been hung up in your facilities, this is a really good opportunity for you to reach out and contact your CDCR facility to find out if they are and possibly test those lines as well. My name is Juliana Baez. I am one of the Training and Technical Assistance Specialists at the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Today, I will be co-presenting with Chris Mady and Matthew Van Winkle, both program officers at Just Detention International.
Thanks very much.
And before we really get deep into the conversations, we want to share our missions. The California Coalition Against Sexual Assault is committed to ending sexual violence through a multifaceted approach of prevention, intervention, education, research, advocacy, and public policy. CALCASA provides leadership, vision, and resources to rape crisis centers, individuals, and other entities that are committed to ending sexual violence. And here at CALCASA, we truly envision a world free from sexual violence.
Thank you, Juliana, and good morning, everyone. Just Detention International, or JDI for short, is a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual violence in all forms of detention. It's JDI's belief that when the government takes away someone's freedom, it takes on an absolute responsibility to protect that person's safety. No matter what crime someone has committed, rape is not part of the penalty. Juliana?
Thank you. The California Advancing PREA project has been funded by the California Office of Emergency Services for the last 4 years, and it has allowed CALCASA and JDI to partner in offering support and guidance to California rape crisis centers on how to build strong relationships with CDCR, with their staff, and how to create sustainable agreements and protocols for the provision of victim services to survivors. And earlier in the project, the Advancing PREA team focused on fundamental culture change on both the corrections and the advocacy sides. And over time, we've put many MOUs in place between CDCR facilities and their local RCCs. We've also provided technical training and assistance wherever is needed. And although much progress has been made, we understand that there continues to be a gap and challenges in the services available to survivors behind bars. And we always like to hear a little bit about our participants. So we invite you to type in the chat box what organization you're from and what CDCR facilities you provide services to. And as we're doing this, hopefully some of you get a chance to type those items into the chat box. We'll go over our agenda today. Today's presentation has 3 sections. Effectively, these sections could be thought of in terms of 3 action verbs: preparing, providing, and sustaining. And we'll begin with thoughts on how to make your agency more ready to provide written correspondence to incarcerated survivors. We're going to continue with some things to be mindful of when writing letters. And we're going to close with ways to make sure that your program of providing emotional support by letters can continue beyond the possible life of this project and any staff turnover that you might experience. I will also like to hear a little bit more about those who are receiving any letters. Again, feel free to put those in the chat box. Has anyone received a letter maybe in the last month? I see all the response coming in. Thank you so much for that. And if you're hearing this part, I'm asking if you received any letters maybe in the last month or in the last 3 months or last 6 months or maybe about a year or over a year. When was the last letter the last time that you received the letter? If you can share that with us, we would like to hear that as well. And as we are getting some of the answers, which we completely appreciate, I always want to encourage everyone to please practice self-care during this webinar. We are really good at promoting it and encouraging everyone else to do it, but we don't practice it ourselves. So please feel free to take some deep breaths, walk around your desk, stand up and stretch, do any activity that would help you be more aware of yourself and also focus during the webinar. We also sent some coloring pages with a reminder of the webinar, so please feel free to color while you're listening as well.
Thanks, Juliana, and thanks to everyone joining us today. We'd like to play a short video now, less than 2 minutes long, so very short. The women that you'll see in this video are incarcerated at the California Institution for Women, and they agreed to be filmed as they read simple holiday messages they received from JDI supporters who did not know these women by name, only that the cards would be received by incarcerated survivors.
There are a lot of people thinking about you. You are not alone. Stay strong, Daniel. From a supporter of Just Detention International.
Keep this. Oh, look at this cards. Oh, season's greeting.
Whoever you are, wherever you are, please know that little old me and all the way in London, England is thinking of you this Christmas. I really hope this makes your day a little brighter. Stay strong.
Dear friend, although I'm writing you from afar, I want you to know that you're not alone. I hope this card brings you hope and peace for the holidays. You are brave and valuable. Perry.
Never give up hope. And Jack.
Dear friend, Merry Christmas. Don't give up. Happy holidays.
You are so strong. I don't know you, but I admire you. Oh, this is so beautiful. I love this.
You inspire with your bravery and strength. I wish you peace, hope, and love this season, Chloe.
Yay, happy holiday. Just go tell my friends about this.
So after seeing that, does anyone have any reactions that they'd like to share to the video? You can type in the chat box. I'll wait for some of those to come in. But as I said before, I want to stress that these messages were sent by people who wrote the messages without knowing who would be opening the envelope, except that they were going to be an incarcerated survivor. They didn't know anything else about the individual, what they'd gone through, details around their assault. And yet, even without that knowledge, the words of support meant so much, as you could see, to those who received them. And we wanted to use this to kind of like lay a foundation. There are folks who might not feel like they have the tools to write effective emotional support via letter. But as advocates who will be receiving requests for emotional support via letter, you're going to have even a little more knowledge about the specific challenges your clients are facing, and you're going to be able to speak to their situation even more directly. So I just wanted to kind of hopefully give some confidence by sharing this video. And we're going to begin today by talking about some of the things you can do to prepare for providing emotional support to incarcerated survivors by letter. I'm sure you've all seen these posters before. These are posters that should now be hanging at your partner CDCR facilities, and they not only feature your agency's phone number, but they also provide your agency's mailing address. As many of you may recall, permitting confidential written correspondence between advocates and incarcerated survivors is specifically mentioned in the MOU between your agency and your CDCR facility. And while not every agency has the capacity to provide such things as groups or in-person services, letter writing is something that is really within the capacity of every rape crisis center. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. You know, in an age of smartphones, letter writing can seem a little bit outdated, like churning butter. Many of you might not be able to remember the last time you sat down to write a letter, even to friends and family. Clients you work with who are not incarcerated would almost never engage with your agency via letter. But letter writing remains a vital connection to the world for people who live in detention who are not permitted to own cell phones. And far from being seen as inferior or outdated, written words of support are sources of hope and encouragement that they can carry with them and read at any time of day. Or as Eric, an incarcerated survivor from Virginia, puts it, "Your brightness shines away the darkness that is this place. Your words and supportive actions fuel my strength and give me the power to overcome and keep moving forward." The most important thing we want you to take away from today's webinar is the knowledge that as advocates, you have sufficient expertise in trauma-informed care to provide the support incarcerated survivors need via letter, even if letter writing is an unfamiliar practice. Letters are simply a different medium for you to provide emotional support. It's useful to think about written correspondence with incarcerated survivors as a conversation. The conversation may play out a bit more slowly than it would on the phone or in person or via text. But just as you wouldn't expect an in-person conversation with a client to end after the first thing you told them in response, the aim with a letter is not to solve all the survivor's problems with one response that encompasses everything, but instead to really hear your client just as you would if they were seated across from you. Some conversations that happen via letter can extend over the course of a year or longer. And that can seem like a lot of paper, but at base, it is just another way to have a conversation. Hotline calls are very helpful for crisis situations. Letter writing is an excellent tool for long-term, ongoing care and uses the same empowerment model used in other forms of advocacy. Chris?
Thank you, Matthew. I really like to use the empowerment model as my framework when I provide services to survivors, especially when I'm doing letter correspondence. As with all of our work, we want to operate with the knowledge that the survivor is the expert in their own life and experience. When we write back to a survivor, we want to offer options and not advice, while being as realistic as possible about the scope of our work. This can be difficult to do in letters, as we're not able to have that immediate back and forth conversation like we do with clients on the phone or in person. However, a wonderful piece about letter writing is that you can take the time to write thoughtfully, and you can always erase sentences that you don't like.
Thanks, Chris. Now, let's talk about some things that we can be aware of in making our agencies ready to provide letter writing to survivors who are incarcerated. Although everyone on your staff should know the basics about the services you offer to CDCR survivors, it is best practice to have a dedicated and thoughtfully chosen team, kind of an incarcerated survivor outreach team, that would have its own methods and practice. Staffers at your agency who will read and reply to letters from CDCR sites and be in communication with the facility about concerns. As Chris mentioned above, whereas in conversation we can quickly correct ourselves when we misspeak, the words we put in writing become the record of our intentions. For this reason, and also out of respect for our clients, it's always best practice to double check things like spelling and punctuation before printing, and to put extra care into the words we choose. Consider having, at least at the beginning, a review process at your agency. Sometimes having just an extra pair of eyes on a document can help make it even stronger. And remember, the letters you send will likely be kept and referred to by your client to read whenever they need a reminder that they have support from the outside. And as I mentioned, when you have that incarcerated survivor outreach team assembled, the best practice is for them to be holding regular check-ins. It could be twice a month or more or less frequently, depending on the flow of letters that you receive. Another important thing to look at is your current intake forms, just in order to make sure that they're appropriate for all survivors, including those who are incarcerated. So let's take a look at some ways we can make the forms more inclusive, as well as help with your record keeping. So you want to make sure that there are spaces on your client intake form to indicate if someone is incarcerated, if so, what facility they're housed at, and where at that facility they're housed, the letter writer's full legal name, and the letter writer's CDCR number. The reason we say full legal name, even if that is not the survivor's preferred name, is that will help you when it comes to looking them up to make sure that their location is correct. And there are also just maybe people at the facility who only know them by their legal name. You're going to want to also make sure that there is space on the intake form to indicate where abuse occurred, whether it was in the community or in the detention setting. And if in the detention setting, where it specifically happened. Was it during a work assignment? Was it where they live? Was it in the shower area? You want to make sure that there's a place to indicate if the abuse was perpetrated by a fellow inmate or staff, and whether the survivor has chosen to report that abuse. This intake form can go into their client file, and because we're talking about letter writing here, you might not get all this information from the client's initial letter, but you can add it in if they continue to write as more information comes out. It's really best practice to have the intake form on your desk so you can take active notes as you read and reply. Location is very important. Obviously, when you're sending a piece of mail, if the person is no longer there, then your advocacy is not going to reach them. And California inmates are often transferred. This can cause anxiety for them about their safety and contributes to a generalized feeling of not having control over their lives. Because transfers can happen randomly, as well as in response to a safety concern of the survivor or as retaliation for reporting, it is always best practice to run the client's CDCR number through the inmate locator before you address your envelope. This database is maintained by CDCR. You can visit it at cdcr.ca.gov, and it's updated daily to be current. Now, here's a little bit about filing and tracking decisions, just so you can be very, very orderly about the letters that come in. You need to make decisions about where and how letters will be stored. Whether that will be in a special filing cabinet that might have a lock, whether they will be scanned electronically and saved that way, how physical letters will be disposed of if you are going to be looking at a policy of how long you keep records. If your agent, I'm sure most of your agencies use a database of some kind, and if you can modify that to make sure that there's a way to distinguish incarcerated clients from non-incarcerated clients, that might be a thing to consider. You can also consider having a fully separate database, as JDI does for those who are incarcerated survivors. You want to make sure that you have a method in place also for tracking the letters that you write, so you can include them on your monthly progress reports. Let's talk a little bit about some research that should be done in order to provide the most effective advocacy. You should be maintaining a list of resources that are available to incarcerated CDCR survivors for both inside and outside of the facility. For resources inside the facility, you can try to find out what kinds of access inmates housed at different levels have to programming, such as mindfulness or art classes or yoga classes, whether or not there are electronic kiosks in housing that can be used for research on their rights or other topics. And in terms of the resources that you maintain a list of for outside the facility, make sure that what you send them is really appropriate for a detention setting. Web addresses can be very helpful to those clients you have in the community, but they are not helpful. It's not helpful to share a URL to someone who is held prisoner and doesn't have access to the internet. And I want to mention here that while I think it's worth mentioning that while sexual abuse in detention is the core of JDI's work, we are not direct service providers. So we don't consider those who write to us from detention settings as clients. Rather, we refer incarcerated survivors who write to us to rape crisis centers such as yourselves. That's in keeping with the intent of the Prison Rape Elimination Act. But of course, we're always here to be resources for you as advocates, but we are not advocates. So just wanted to make sure that was very clear. And as you refer clients to resources that might help them cope with the trauma they're experiencing, keep in mind that there are different housing classifications inside facilities, and where someone is housed has a big impact on what their life looks like day to day. It can mean the difference between going outside to exercise, for example, or being confined to a small indoor rec room, as you can see here in the picture. It's also good to educate yourself on mailroom procedures and have a sense of how quickly a letter makes it to your agency. Always make a note of the date and see how recently it was written and compare that to the postmark. It's good to know if mail is delivered to inmates at the facility only on certain days, and it's good to make sure that the mailroom staff at the facility are aware that mail marked with the evidentiary code 1035.4 is to be treated as confidential and legal mail. Also, something we highly recommend in every case is to find a way to meet with members of the Inmate Advisory Council, sometimes known as the Men's Advisory Council or Women's Advisory Council, shortened MAC or WAC. That is very highly recommended, as these representatives of the inmate population are the most familiar people with the culture in place at the prison, and will be able to instruct you and give guidance about how to talk about your services. The PREA compliance manager should be able to get you connected to the MAC or WAC, but if you've made repeated attempts and still aren't having any luck, never hesitate to let us know that. Now here's a little bit about what to expect, and you can expect a lot of variety. Letters can vary widely in length. Some letters may be a single sentence, such as, "Please send me a list of your services," or "Please add me to your mailing list." Other letters may stretch over many pages, and the act of writing may be a form of processing or self-soothing for that survivor. Some letters may not directly disclose sexual abuse at all. Others may allude to it but not state it directly. Others may almost bury it in the middle of a letter that ranges over multiple topics. Some letters may disclose immediately that sexual assault has taken place, but will place an emphasis on legal remedies rather than emotional support for themselves. And there's a lot of variety when it comes to the education level, the handwriting practice, and other issues that can make us fall back on kind of a very thoughtful approach to reading, almost practicing an art of reading, in which we try to, as always, meet the client where they are and stay alert for trends that are coming up about a certain site and any anecdotal stories that might be issues to raise with facility staff. It's also good to kind of keep make a note of names of staff that you might hear or read again and again in connection with a lack of safety for inmates. Chris?
Thank you, Matthew. And again, as Matthew mentioned, we know that letter writing can be daunting, but it's a vital way for survivors to receive that ongoing, long-term follow-up care and emotional support. So we're going to delve a little bit into the basics of letter writing so you feel a little bit more prepared to respond to letters you receive from inmates at CDCR facilities. So when you get a letter, you essentially want to treat it as you would a hotline call. You're there to respond and provide emotional support and safety planning. As such, you want to make sure a response is as timely as possible. So best practice is to write back within 2 business days of receiving a letter. Generally speaking, response letters should be 1 to 2 pages. Even if a survivor writes several pages to you, you want to stick to reflecting feelings and offering options for healing. All of your letters should be typed in response. You also want to make sure that you sign each of your letters from you, so it's a little bit more personal. When you address the letter, like Matthew stated, you want to make sure you put the survivor's full first legal name and last name, as well as their CDCR number and the facility name and mailing address of the facility on the outside of the envelope. If a survivor is using a nickname or is a name different from their legal name, still make sure to use that legal name on the outside of the envelope, and on the inside, on the letter itself, address it to the person's chosen name. You want to make sure your response letter is able to be read by people who have a wide range of reading abilities. So make sure to use a font size and type that is easy to read. Also, make sure the language you're using is accessible. You never know the education level of the survivors you're working with, and you want to make sure that what you're writing is understood. I always try to write at about a 6th grade reading level, and I always make sure to use simple language in as clear as a possible way. It can also be helpful if the advocate who responds is consistent throughout the work with that survivor. So if possible, try to keep the same advocate with the same survivor, just as you might with a survivor in the community who's seeking in-person services.
Thank you, Chris. And as I mentioned above, and as many of you already know, CDCR has agreed to treat mail that is marked with evidentiary code 1035.4 on the outer envelope, as seen here, as confidential legal mail. This means that all letters so marked are not read by staff and are opened in the presence of the inmate. So in order to protect your clients and provide confidential advocacy, be sure to write this code on all the envelopes that you send to incarcerated survivors at CDCR and encourage them to do the same if they respond to you. I should say also that I know that those working who are also doing work in other correction systems such as county jails, Bureau of Prisons, immigration, this is an agreement that we have with CDCR to be treated as confidential, and so that is specific to CDCR.
Great. So once you have an understanding of the protocols and what a response letter should look like, your next step might be to figure out how you want to screen letters. So this way you can start to set your priorities and how to budget your time to read and respond to these letters. As every letter is very different, some may be very quick to read and respond to, and others might take much longer. So as soon as you receive a letter, you can read it and try to assess what the needs of the writer are. From there, you can start thinking about what your response might be depending on what the person is writing about. I like to start thinking first about the level of safety the person has and what their current level of crisis is. And from there, determine what kind of abuse the person is describing and what other issues they're bringing up. From this assessment, you can start to think about how to connect them to resources and what might be most applicable for that individual. Those things can be the meat of the letter, but you also want to develop a rapport with the writer, as the goal is to provide ongoing care through these correspondence. While JDI does not provide ongoing intensive letter writing correspondence with survivors, something we do at JDI is send a packet to people when they make first contact with us. And we encourage you to create a packet that could be sent to survivors you work with as well. A first response packet could include things like your letter back to the survivor, of course, but also a list of your services, and can include information about trauma and coping inside, as well as someone's rights under PREA. So if applicable, it can also include a release of information and information on how that person can continue to receive support from your agency, such as via the hotline. You can also include information on how the survivor can reach out to another rape crisis center if they're ever transferred. You may already have materials that you give survivors in the community, and these can be adapted to fit the needs of survivors in detention and sent in this packet. In your response letter to a survivor, the introductory paragraph can always start with thanking the writer for contacting your agency. You can also describe what your agency can and cannot do. It can be helpful to let a writer know what you can do in terms of copying or storing documents for them, as well as the limits of your confidentiality and the amount of advocacy you're able to do. When we get a letter, it can be helpful to determine what the nature of the letter is and what that person is seeking. Some of the types of letters you may receive are where survivors are trying to get general emotional support, support for ongoing abuse, or they may want your help with advocating on their behalf. Other letters may be off topic, or the writer might be expressing suicidal ideation. These echo the kinds of calls we get from survivors in detention, as well as the work we do with survivors in the community, and we can use the same skills and languages in our responses. Remember, do not underestimate the power of emotional support. So even if no other support is available, it can be enough to tell someone you believe them and it's not their fault. Statements providing emotional support should be peppered throughout response letters. If you're unsure of your ability to provide institutional advocacy or at what level, make sure to talk with your team and your supervisor so you can be clear about this in your response to a survivor. Similarly, research any information or questions related to PREA before you respond to ensure that the information you provide is applicable. So one of the most common letters you may receive are ones like this, where someone is seeking general emotional support.
Dear Advocate, I saw your info in a resource guide. I didn't have anyone else to talk to about this, so I thought I'd try writing to you. A few months ago, something happened here with one of the other inmates. She's gone now, but I feel so violated and dirty. I just feel like somehow this is my fault. I've been having nightmares and I haven't slept well since it happened. I just want to feel normal again.
Thank you. So does anyone have any ideas of what they might write back to this person if they receive this letter? And can folks write that in the chat box? Okay. I'm seeing validating feelings. Always reminding the person that it's not their fault. That definitely can be helpful. And you can always send people available resources. Okay. Yeah, so for letters like this, we want to respond with the same statements we would use with survivors in the community. We would let the survivor know that what happened to them is not their fault. We would normalize trauma responses, and we might offer up some coping skills around sleep and nightmares, since this person brought that up. So even though you might not be offering a tangible resource to someone, letters like this allow us to build rapport with that person. And it's important to remember just how vital emotional support is for a survivor. You may be able to send materials such as information on how to do progressive muscle relaxation or a worksheet on sleep hygiene, just as you might give a survivor in the community, but always make sure that you modify those materials to be applicable in a detention setting, and that you provide explanations on what these materials are and how the survivor can use them in your response letter. Remember, you are the resource for the survivor, so referring them to mental health care within the facility is often not appropriate. You are often the only ongoing support around trauma that is available to a survivor. Another type of letter you may receive is from someone who's experiencing ongoing abuse in detention.
Hello, I saw your address on a poster in here, and I hope maybe you can help me. One of the COs always gets me alone to do searches, and when he does, he sticks his finger in me. I used to just put up with it, but last time he got me alone, he made me go down on him. I don't know what to do, and I haven't told anyone. I'm scared and I feel so alone. I want to report him and I want to get checked out because I want to make sure he didn't give me a disease or something, but I'm afraid. I don't know what would happen if I say what he did, but I know no one will believe me unless I have proof.
So can folks write in the chat box some ideas they might have in response to this person? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sophia. So it's not your fault. That's definitely something we can always remind folks. We believe you. Thank you, Scott. Possible reporting options, definitely. That's something you can definitely focus on when someone is disclosing ongoing abuse, is really offering what their reporting options can be without sort of suggesting that one will be better than the other. Because again, we know that the survivor knows themselves best. So we want to make it clear that whatever they choose is the right thing for them, but that you're there to process with them whether or not they want to go forward with making a report. Definitely. You can also give someone information on PREA and just their rights under PREA as well. For folks that were assaulted within detention settings, survivors may write to you hoping for you to help advocate on their behalf in regards to their PREA report. So for letters like this, it's very important to know what level of advocacy you're able to do so you can respond with clear expectations for that person.
Dear advocate, I filed a PREA report after my assault last month, but nothing has happened and no investigation has opened. The CO that assaulted me last month still works in the unit that I'm stuck in. I have to see him every day. Do you think you could talk to someone so I'm not in this housing unit? Do you think you can help me find out what is going on with the report?
So again, with letters like this, it can be really, really important to have a strong understanding of what you can and cannot do so that you're not setting this person up to have expectations that aren't going to be met. So when you respond to a letter like this, you want to validate their frustrations with the system. You want to provide reporting options and explain their rights under PREA. So in the chat box, if you're someone that does provide advocacy on someone's behalf, is there anything that you think that you might want to include in a letter? What kind of things might you be able to offer this person? Yes, so thank you, Lauren, for bringing a release of information. Yes, so if you are able to offer advocacy on behalf of survivor, it's going to be really important if your agency requires a release of information to send that in your response letter back. And in your response letter back, you want to make sure to explain what a release of information is and how that person can fill it out. And so you might be contacting a PREA compliance manager on behalf of this person. And in your release of information, you can have it made out to the PCM and the survivor. And you might want to state to the survivor that you're going to reach out to talk to the PCM to see what's going on with their investigation, and you'll let them know whatever you hear. Definitely. Other thoughts on things that we might do if we are going to provide advocacy for this person? Okay. Keep them updated via letter, yeah, and you want to make sure that they know what's going on, so you're not sort of this entity that's coming in, but then you're not ever getting back to them. So always make sure that you're updating them with what's going on every step. Thank you, Lauren, for sharing that. It's also very important that if you are going to be providing advocacy, that you let a survivor know the limitations on what you can do and also the possible repercussions that your advocacy efforts may have. It's really important to be transparent about that. For folks that are not able to do that level of advocacy, how might you explain what you can and cannot do for this person? So that can be a little bit trickier to figure out, is sort of letting someone know that you can't do something. And so it's really important to reiterate what you can and cannot do. Thank you, Lauren. And if you're not able to do something on their behalf, really just sharing what your capacity is and what your available services are. And always remind them that you're there for that emotional support. But again, like Matthew mentioned in the chat box, you want to be really careful not to overpromise something, and really make sure that you're being honest about what you can and cannot do. And like Juliana mentioned, you can always give additional options under PREA. Thank you. So as when we're working on a hotline, one of the scariest things that can come up is someone who's thinking about suicide. And in a letter, it can be difficult to delineate between suicidal ideation and a suicide plan, as you're not able to have that immediate back and forth with the survivor. So a letter you might receive may be something similar to this.
Hello, I'm writing to you because everything is awful. I was repeatedly abused as a child and it just keeps happening. This last assault makes me think that this will never stop. I can't go on. I have a lot of pills that I've been piling up, and I think I'm going to take them so I don't have to deal with this anymore.
So with a letter like this, in your response, you want to make sure you're following your general suicide protocols, and you also want to make sure you're helping that survivor safety plan. So if needed, you may need to break confidentiality to follow your agency's protocol, and you may need to call your contact at the facility. But how you respond to a letter like this needs to be on a case-by-case basis. Make sure you always refer to your agency's policies, professional standards, and the California state guidelines to determine whether it's necessary to break confidentiality. You want to make sure you know who to contact at the facility that can intervene. So is it going to be someone in the facility's medical or mental health, or is it the PCM? So it's really important to know who that is. If you think that that client or anyone else at the facility is in danger, you need to consider speaking directly with the facility head or an investigator. In every case involving confidentiality, advocates should respond in a way that ensures a client's safety while minimizing any violation of that person's privacy. But whether or not you decide confidentiality needs to be broken, you want to respond to survivors. You want to make sure you're responding to that survivor's letter, and make sure your letter back outlines your limits on confidentiality and provides strong emotional support and basic safety planning for that person. At times, you might also receive letters that are off topic, such as this one.
Hi, thank you so much for responding to my letter. I was worried you wouldn't write back because of my crime. I'm doing much better now thanks to you. What would really help me right now would be if you could find me a lawyer so I can fight my wrongful arrest. Also, can you please find and send me the phone number of my cousin?
So in a letter like this, how might you clarify your services and your role, and how can you establish boundaries? Can folks write in the chat box some ways that they might respond to this letter in terms of establishing boundaries? Yeah, so you can always share your current capacity of your work. Absolutely. Mention your mission statement. That can be really helpful to just bring it back about the work that you're doing, that you're there for survivors of sexual violence to work around their healing process. So restating kind of, again, your mission of your agency, definitely. When you're setting these boundaries, it can be important that we are remaining professional when we're explaining the scope of our services, because we get a lot of different letters that are off topic. So some of them might be for folks that are asking for legal help that's not related to their sexual abuse. Some might be inappropriate. And then some are just letters where the person is just sort of seeming to want to talk more in a pen pal sort of situation. And so with all off-topic letters, it's important to remember that even if the person does not disclose sexual abuse, it doesn't necessarily mean they're not a survivor. They might just be testing to see if you respond or if your services seem safe. So you want to make sure you're responding to all letters that you receive, even if it's just to explain what your services are and what the boundary of your work is. Yeah, and I want to just mention what Lauren wrote in the chat box about how it would be really wonderful to get in touch with your cousin. However, that's not something that you're able to do. Yeah. And then Lauren offered up maybe sending that person an envelope with a stamp. So that's something that can be a little bit tricky, is sending someone stamps who's incarcerated. So it's really important to check in with your facility to see if that's allowed in the mail. And if that's in the capacity of your organization, but you can definitely offer that up if it's available. Yeah, but making sure you're being really clear about the scope of your work, for sure. Thank you for these great responses. So again, letter writing can seem like a daunting task, as it's something we're maybe not super familiar with, but for survivors like Ricardo, letter writing allows an incarcerated survivor to receive that vital emotional support. And when we can put the same time and care into a response letter as we do when we're seeing a client in person or talking to a client on the phone, incarcerated survivors are able to get the healing they might not be able to access anywhere else. So as Ricardo stated, if you only knew the strength I get every time I get a letter from you all. I used to think I was alone. Thank you so much for the support. Juliana?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Matthew, for getting us started and having these conversations. And we've said it before, and we'll say it again, that currently and formerly incarcerated survivors have stated again and again how important letters are to their well-being. And this form of communication might also be the most comfortable and vital way for survivors to connect with an advocate. Many who are just looking for maybe referrals or support managing their feelings, or just want to share their story with a compassionate listener. For incarcerated survivors who do not feel disclosing the abuse to staff or loved ones, letters to an outside agency may feel like the safest way to reach out for help. And we understand that providing services to incarcerated survivors can pose a number of challenges to rape crisis centers. Some RCCs may feel like they lack experience in responding via letters to people behind bars. Others might feel like they just don't have sufficient resources or enough trained staff, or fear staff burnout. So let's discuss next steps to begin ensuring sustainability for your program. And disclosure, just like everything else, is that these are just guidelines. So even preparing before you begin this service, or during the services, or after, these are just guidelines that your RCC can utilize, but in no way exceeds every option. So let's begin by asking ourselves the following. How do we realistically continue the work? And how does sustainability look for my agency? And based on your agency, your location, your facilities, these questions are going to look completely different for every RCC. So if we really want to make a shift in ending sexual violence, we have to really believe that every single person should be reached. Making PREA and your agency services for incarcerated survivors a constant topic of conversation ensures a real shift for survivors behind bars, such as providing updates during staff meetings, SART meetings, and make part of PREA part of your community outreach as well when appropriate. So have those conversations with just more than your PCM or any person directly linked to the facility. Having space to talk about your agency's current PREA capacity ensures that every survivor behind bars receives constant guidance. For example, knowing the correct address to send written correspondence. I don't know if many of you know, but many of our RCCs do not utilize their physical address for written correspondence. Instead, they use your PO box. So that's something that is important to know. Than just you. So if you're the PREA advocate, make sure that everyone else knows that in your agency as well. The more familiar your agency is with the protocol of written correspondence and the capacity of the services, the greater the likelihood a survivor behind bars will receive the appropriate support. We also encourage you to provide ongoing updates and training to ensure that all staff has basic skills of what is happening inside detention and can support one another. Self-care is also crucial for sustainability, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in the following slides, but we always like to put it in there and remind everyone that self-care is part of sustainability. And just like services in the community, The work that we do in detention is constantly shifting to meet the demands and needs of survivors and their community. So we talk a little more about tracking and data on the following slides, but it's important to keep in mind that you all have the skills to provide support to survivors behind bars via written correspondence. And remind yourself that these letters provide ongoing emotional support and tangible tools of advocacy for a survivor. Written correspondence also gives us an opportunity to be thoughtful in our responses, just like Chris and Matthew shared with us earlier. And I apologize because I think everyone could probably hear the fire truck behind me. So as we've done through this project, we need to report on the services we're providing. And we understand that progress reports are not the most fun part of our job, but the reality is that in order to show the impact of our work, we have to complete them. The current Advancing PREA progress report, which is due on the 10th of each month, just throwing in the reminder in there, has a section devoted specifically to written correspondence. Tracking the amount of letters your agency receives shows the need and impact of written correspondence when servicing survivors behind bars. The data that you collect from these letters can also be utilized to help identify trends and needs inside your facility, especially data coming from victim services. For those of you whose current capacity is groups, it's a good place to identify some needs inside the facility or additional groups inside the facility. It also gives you an opportunity to continue building strong relationships with your facility by supporting them with possible trainings that they might not have capacity to be reaching. So our advocacy can also be guided from these letters. Are you seeing the name of a specific officer over and over again in connection with abuse or harassment? Are there members of specific demographic groups targeted with more frequency at a certain facility? By identifying these needs, your agency is able to advocate for the need of additional training and more. And this can be possible by building those strong relationships. We also encourage you to keep in mind that the data that you collect can be powerful in guiding conversations with your facility on the needs for specific training for inmates. It's not only just for the staff, it could be for the inmates as well, and even for your own agency. Training that could benefit the safety of the facility and can help identify communities of need within your community. Always keeping in mind that these might not look the same for facility to facility, and the dynamics are different from site to site. We always want to keep in mind as well that your facility is part of your community, and therefore it impacts the work that you do. And again, just a friendly reminder that all progress reports are due on the 10th of each month or on the next business days if it's a holiday. And we just sent out the latest template for the progress report, but if you don't have access to it, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. So we've spent some time on identifying what to do prior to receiving the letter, things to keep in mind when we do get those letters or when we have them in our hands. And we also took a look at some of the logistics of sustainability, such as making your work with survivors behind bars part of your agency's protocol and what to do with the information that we collect. But all of this will not be enough if we don't take in mind the following action items. As advocates, we feel like we never do enough and that we should always push our limits for our survivors, which then causes higher rates of staff burnout. We encourage you to identify and train more than one staff to respond to written correspondence. Having one person focus on responding to these letters can create a feeling of isolation and can create burnout. And we've heard that over and over again, that this work can create that feeling of isolation and of not having support from your colleagues, not because they're doing it on purpose, but it's just the nature of the work. And also as advocates, we have to remember that just like in the community, if we don't feel comfortable doing something or responding to something or just don't feel comfortable with the skills that we currently possess, then we should ask for support and that we should be able to check in with our staff. And that's going to happen more if we, again, start having these conversations and make it a normal conversation and dialogue within your agency. Also remember that this work is not specific to one advocate. It should be an entire agency focus. The work should be part of your agency services to all survivors. And these are also steps to follow for self-care, right? If we don't follow these things, then self-care is not going to happen as well. All of these items will not be successful if at the end of the day we haven't identified appropriate resources for survivors behind bars. So look at the data that you're collecting and ask your facility what specific resources are available within the walls, and have honest conversations in your agency and partners to identify resources available for survivors behind bars. If you keep survivors behind bars a constant topic of conversation in your community, then you can likely identify the most up-to-date resources for survivors behind bars as well. Again, don't overpromise, just do your research and what is truly available for survivors behind bars. Don't just create a list of resources that you think are going to be sustainable when they might not be, right? Some agencies might not be able to provide services to survivors behind bars just yet. So make sure that when you're doing your research, that those resources are truly available for them. And really, we can't talk about sustainability without mentioning funding. We've had an opportunity to fund our RCCs with CDCR facilities for the last 4 years. And as much as we would love to implement the current funding indefinitely, we know that's truly not sustainable. So we encourage you to keep an eye on all other available funding through Cal OES or VOCA. Sometimes CDCR themselves has some funding out there for victim services. So, do your research again and look for stuff. Whenever we run into stuff, especially now, we'll definitely be sending it out your ways as well, so that you continue supporting survivors behind bars. And always, and most important as well, is to track and report that data. The tracking and reporting of that data, it helps clearly identify the great need for services for survivors behind bars, especially when it comes to written correspondence, because it tends to be, first of all, the most confidential form of services, and at this point, it might be the most reliable and most consistent service as well for your agency. So here is a quote from Carrie, and she is a prisoner rape survivor. She shares that, "Thank you for helping me realize I too am a person and didn't deserve the treatment I received. Thank you for helping me realize I have a voice and that there are people willing to listen to me." As we're coming to a close of our webinar, I hope that your wheels are turning. And again, these are just some of the beginning guidelines, and we can always provide more one-on-one support in helping you develop more of a sustainable programming when it comes to written correspondence. But we do want to share some upcoming events as well. January 8th, we have scheduled our complex trauma and detention webinar, and it will cover how to develop procedures for clients displaying self-harm behaviors or experiencing suicidal or homicidal ideation. We hope that during this webinar, we'll also identify ways that crisis is experienced differently by clients who are in detention, and how to safety plan and provide appropriate follow-up for incarcerated clients in high crisis. March 12th, we have scheduled our Sustaining our Services, Sustaining Ourselves, which will help us learn how to sustain emotional support services for incarcerated survivors as your agencies grow and change. And we want to hopefully learn how to avoid advocate burnout and maintain self-care, and learn how to navigate your own identity in detention settings. We also invite you to keep an eye on the South and North region in-person trainings that are happening soon. So if you're in the North or South region of the state, please keep an eye for those upcoming trainings. You can also reach us by connecting to advocate@justdetention.org or priya.casa.org. The team has access, everyone in the team has access to these emails, so we will all respond to it. You also have our individual emails, so you can reach us at any time. We always encourage you to send us an email, give us a call. We are here to support you, and we are always available. we also like to provide some additional resources, and these are our constant resources. The California Coalition Against Sexual Assault website is housing the online modules, and pretty soon we'll be uploading all of the past webinars in more of a YouTube format or platform. I know that iLink sometimes created some challenges, so we're working on that, and those should be up in the next couple of months. We also have amazing toolkits and other resources for you to utilize. Just Detention International, just like CACASA, houses a big amount of webinars on working in detentions and toolkits and amazing resources as well. And our to-go resource for the entire team is the PREA Resource Center. I don't think we say it enough, but they have an amazing FAQ section that tends to respond to a lot of our questions. So we always encourage you to go there. They give you a great explanation of whatever question you might have, if it's within the FAQ. So please utilize them, and they have other resources as well within their website. At this time, we want to give some space to some questions, wondering if anyone has any questions. We would also like to hear, I know that some participants joined us a little bit after we started, so maybe they can share what agency they're from and their facilities. When was the last time they received a letter? Any questions, any thoughts? We really want to give you this time and this platform to feel free and share that with us. Go ahead and ask, Lauren. We have I promise, there's no random questions. They're all connected somehow. So feel free to ask any question, even if it's not a written correspondence one. We are here for you. We definitely encourage you to ask questions, share your thoughts, even let us know, what you felt was missing or what would you like us to talk a little bit more about. I know it's a lot of information. That's it. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, well, we can reach out to you, Lauren, and tell you a little bit more about it, but just putting out there that we do have a California Advancing newsletter that we try to share a lot of articles and highlight our advocates. That could be a good place for us to share that as well. We can definitely make it part of our webinars or materials if your client is okay with us sharing that stuff. We always like to incorporate survivors into our work. So if your client says it's good for us to share that stuff, we would definitely like to put it into our stuff. We are in the middle of developing our toolkit. That might be a good place for it as well. It's going to be a long living toolkit. There's a lot of options, so we can definitely talk about where you would like to see that as well, Lauren.
I think also just a piece to add to that is it could be an opportunity for you to show any survivor art at your agency as well. So this could be like an outreach opportunity to other incarcerated survivors to kind of highlight their art and their healing process if folks are open to that. So it's not only can you do it with us, but also with your own agency as well.
Yeah. And if you're having those conversations, like we mentioned, with other members of your community, maybe that also could be a good platform, right? To just share the words of survivors within detention and humanize them as you're having these conversations with other people who might not be as involved with PREA work or might still be a little new to the understanding of the importance of working with survivors behind bars. Yeah, that's also a great way of putting it. Definitely making PREA a constant topic of conversation within our communities is important, and it's really going to help shift the services for survivors. So putting it up in a blog with additional PREA information, that's a great way of promoting it. I think one of the things that we don't talk a lot about is the third outside reporting, where family members can report or other people can report from the outside. that's a good way of promoting that as well. We tend not to talk too much about it, not because it's not important, but because we're always so focused on just the crisis part of it and the immediate response to it. But there's other things under PREA that could definitely support our survivors behind bars. And yeah, putting it in a blog, it's a great idea. Thank you for sharing that, Lauren, by the way. We definitely get really excited and look forward to seeing that poetry. We've seen amazing art when we go into the detentions. We've seen amazing programs, and we've met incredible people who have a lot of skills and abilities and are really amazing. Any other thoughts? Yes, so I will be sending out the link of the recording, and as soon as it's converted into more of a YouTube format, I will be putting it up at the CACASA website, and we'll be sending out that as well. So all of our previous webinars are being currently converted into a YouTube platform where it's making it easier for our advocates to view. I know, like I mentioned before, iLink was a little temperamental, so we decided let's just convert them all into a YouTube-like format. So once those are finalized and available, we will be putting them up. I think that this format might make it easier to do that a little bit faster. So we will send out the link to the recording, and as soon as it's converted, we will send that as well so that everyone can share it. And thank you, Scott, for mentioning that too, sharing it with other advocates. We think that it's important that even if not everyone in your agency is going to be focusing on the PREA work, that they are at least exposed to a lot of these webinars and exposed to the conversations. This way, if, for example, Scott says, I need to take a couple days off, right? Or I need to take care of myself, that someone else can continue the sustainability of those services. So we definitely invite you to share everything that you that we have or develop or share with you with everyone else in your agency. Don't keep it to yourself, just because we definitely don't want you to feel like you're the only one holding that and that you may not be, you can't take care of yourself because you're holding that. So share that with everyone else. Any other thoughts, questions? And as we're coming to the end of our webinar, again, we do have our monthly newsletter. So if you're not receiving that, send us an email. Send Matthew an email. He has the listserv for that. So, or send anyone really an email with that, and we can add you to the list. We try to put articles related to the current stage of our project. So if we're talking about written correspondence, we'll try to look for stuff that it applies a little bit closer to that. We also try to highlight our rape crisis centers and our advocates, because you all are doing an amazing job. So we encourage that. And if you ever run into an article that you love, send it our way as well, just like Lauren did. So send those our way as well so that we can share it at a bigger platform as well. So we always love to hear what you're hearing and what you're running into. Oh, I think I know what you're talking about, Lauren. Any other thoughts, any other questions? Again, just a reminder that these are just guidelines. These are not the ultimate list of items to keep in mind. This is more of a guideline to start thinking, to start processing. Every resource and every service is going to be very unique to the facility and very unique, most importantly, to the survivor. So always keep that in mind. Always reach out for support. You are not alone. We are here to support you. We can help you in whatever way we can. We can help you in whatever way you want us to help you. You know, if you don't have any questions right now, but as you're rethinking or processing the information that we share with you today, if you have any other questions, feel free to email us, call us, you know, send us a quick message, whatever, you know, whatever platform you rather use, do that whenever you're ready. We are very grateful that you all were here with us today, and we hope that these conversations and these examples of some of the letters can really truly be a resource and a tool to just start thinking of how you already have the skills to respond to letters, and to making sure that survivors behind bars truly receive the much needed services. And again, we want to thank you for being here and being part of our conversations. We truly are honored to have amazing advocates such as yourselves being part of this project. And we, like we mentioned at the beginning, we've seen a lot of changes, but there's still a lot of work to do, and we couldn't do it. We couldn't do all the work unless you all were with us in this journey. So thank you so much, and thank you for always keeping survivors behind bars at the top of your support and at the top of your work as well. We really appreciate that, and we again encourage you to reach out whenever you have any questions, any concerns, or just want to process something. We are also here to just help you process stuff as well. So thank you so much, and I want to thank my amazing team, Matthew and Chris, for just being part of this as well. I know we have Jessica and Liliana on the phones or joining us via their computers, and we want to thank them as well. So thank you all for so much. Hi, Jessica. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So we will send out the link as soon as it's ready with the PDF format of the PowerPoint as well. Thank you so much, and have an amazing day, everyone.